Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Harold Kessler, but everyone calls me Harry. I've been running this radio station up on Point Pleasant Ridge for 23 years now, and I've never seen anything like what happened in November of 1966. I need to tell someone about this. Maybe other radio operators will believe me. Maybe they won't, but I have to get it out. The station sits way up high, overlooking the Ohio River Valley. It's just me up here most days, keeping track of the weather and monitoring emergency frequencies. I like the quiet. Always have. After the Navy, after years of crowded ships and noisy ports, this feels like peace. My equipment is good, better than most places get. I've got 3 main radios, weather monitoring gear, and backup power that could run for days. The Forest Service trusts me to keep things working when storms hit or when someone gets lost in the woods down below. November came in cold that year. Colder than usual. The trees had already dropped most of their leaves, and you could see for miles through the bare branches. At night, the lights from the towns below looked like scattered stars. I was doing my usual evening check, testing frequencies, recording weather data, making sure everything was ready for the overnight shift. That's when I first heard the voice. Emergency dispatch, this is Unit 7. We've got multiple casualties at the Silver Bridge. Bridge collapse, repeat, bridge collapse. We need all available rescue units. I stopped what I was doing. The Silver Bridge was fine. I could see it from my window, cars crossing back and forth like always. But the voice on the radio sounded real. Scared. Like he was really looking at something terrible. I checked my frequency settings. Sometimes signals bounce weird off the mountains, pick up chatter from other states, but this was coming through on our local emergency channel. Dispatch, Unit 7, do you copy? We've got cars in the water. Oh God, there's so many. The voice cut out. Static filled the radio, then nothing. I tried calling back. This is Point Pleasant Ridge Station to Unit 7. What's your location? Please respond. Silence. I walked to the window and looked down at the Silver Bridge. Traffic was normal. Lights moving slowly across the span in both directions. No emergency vehicles, no problems at all. But something felt wrong. The air outside seemed too still. Too quiet. Even the wind that always blows up here had stopped. I went back to my radio and tried our local dispatcher. Point Pleasant Dispatch. This is Ridge Station. Did you copy any emergency traffic about the Silver Bridge just now? Sarah Murphy's voice came back clear and calm. Negative, Ridge Station. All quiet here. Bridge traffic is normal. You feeling okay up there, Harry? Yeah, Sarah. Must have been some kind of interference. But I wrote it down in my log anyway. Time, frequency, what I heard. In the Navy, they taught us to write everything down. Even the weird stuff. Especially the weird stuff. The next few hours passed normal enough. I checked weather readings every hour, monitored the emergency channels, tested my backup systems. Around midnight, I made myself coffee and settled in for the long watch. That's when I heard my own voice on the radio. Point Pleasant Dispatch. This is Ridge Station. I need to report multiple emergency vehicles heading toward the Silver Bridge. Something big is happening down there. But I wasn't talking. I was just sitting there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, listening to myself have a conversation I wasn't having. Ridge Station. Dispatch. We show no emergency calls in that area. Are you certain about what you're seeing? Dispatch. I can see the lights from here. Fire trucks, ambulances, police. They're all converging on the bridge approach. I set down my coffee and looked out the window. The bridge was dark except for normal traffic lights. No emergency vehicles anywhere. Ridge Station. Are you experiencing equipment problems? Your signal is breaking up. No problems here, dispatch. Equipment is. Wait, oh no. Oh God, no. The bridge is. It's falling. The whole bridge is falling into the river. The radio went silent. I stood there shaking. That was my voice. I know my own voice, but I hadn't said any of those things. I was looking right at the bridge, and it was fine. I checked all my equipment twice. Everything was working perfectly. No sign of malfunction, no sign of interference. But somehow, I'd just listened to myself report a disaster that wasn't happening. I wrote it all down, every word I could remember, the time, the frequency, the fact that it was my own voice talking about things I couldn't see. The coffee tasted like metal after that. I couldn't stop looking out at the bridge, waiting for something to happen. But hours passed, and nothing did. Just before dawn, I dozed off in my chair. When I woke up, the morning dispatcher was calling me for my daily weather report. Everything was back to normal. "Morning, Harry. How's the weather looking up there?" "Morning, Tom. Clear skies. Temperature 32 degrees. Light winds from the northwest. Normal. Routine. Like nothing had happened. But when I looked at my logbook, there it was, written in my own handwriting. The radio chatter about the bridge collapse, the emergency vehicles, my own voice reporting disaster. I should have called in sick that day, should have driven down to town and talked to someone. But I'd been alone up here for so long, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. And I had a job to do. The Forest Service was counting on me to keep that station running. People's lives depended on emergency communications working when they needed them. So I stayed. I kept monitoring the frequencies. I kept writing everything down. And that night, it started happening again. The second night was when I realized this wasn't just equipment trouble. I was monitoring the emergency frequencies like always when I picked up what sounded like a search and rescue operation. Multiple voices, all talking at once, coordinating a rescue in the national forest. "Base camp, this is Search Team 3. We found the missing hikers, 2 adults, 1 child. They're hurt bad." "Search Team 3, what's your location?" "About 2 miles up Cascade Trail. We need medical evacuation immediately." I grabbed my trail maps. Cascade Trail was in my coverage area. If there were really injured people up there, I needed to coordinate with local emergency services. But when I called our dispatcher, Sarah told me there were no missing hikers reported, no search operation, no teams in the field. "Harry, are you sure about what you're hearing? I can check with the county sheriff, but we haven't had any missing persons reports today." I told her to check anyway. While I waited, I kept listening to the rescue operation on my radio. "Base camp, we've got the child stabilized, but 1 adult isn't responding. We need that helicopter now. Search Team 3, helicopter is inbound. Mark your location with flares." Flares deployed. Landing zone secured. I could hear the helicopter in the background on the radio. The heavy thump of rotors, the whine of the engine. It sounded close. So I went outside and listened. Nothing, just the usual forest sounds. No helicopter anywhere in the valley. Sarah called back. "Harry, county sheriff, says no search operations in the area. No missing persons. No helicopters. You might be picking up chatter from another state. But the voices were using our call signs. Our frequency codes. They knew the local trail names, the emergency protocols for our specific area. I stayed outside for another hour, listening to the radio through my open door. The rescue operation continued. They loaded the injured people into the helicopter. Everyone made it out okay. But there was never any helicopter in my valley. The third night, things got worse. I was monitoring weather frequencies when I heard the tornado warning. A meteorologist from our regional office was issuing emergency alerts for severe weather heading toward the valley communities. National Weather Service to all emergency coordinators. Large tornado confirmed on the ground, moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. Immediate evacuation recommended for Point Pleasant, Henderson, and surrounding areas. I looked outside. The night was perfectly clear. Stars everywhere. No wind at all. But the radio kept going. Tornado has crossed the river. Multiple structures damaged in Point Pleasant. Emergency shelters are opening at the high school and community center. I tried calling the National Weather Service directly. Got through to Tom Bradley, the meteorologist I'd worked with for years. "Tom, this is Harry, up at Ridge Station. Are you guys tracking severe weather tonight?" "Harry, no. We've got high pressure sitting over the whole region. Clear skies for the next 3 days at least. Why?" I told him what I was hearing on the radio. He went quiet for a minute. "Harry, that's impossible. I'm looking at all our equipment right now. There's no storm system anywhere within 500 miles. But I could still hear the emergency broadcasts, people calling for help, rescue teams responding to tornado damage. the meteorologist, who sounded exactly like Tom Bradley, updating the emergency information. "Harry, you still there?" "Yeah, Tom, I'm here. Maybe you should come down to town tomorrow. Get that equipment checked out." After Tom hung up, I sat in my chair and listened to the tornado emergency for 3 more hours. People trapped in collapsed buildings. Power lines down. Injuries, but no deaths. Everyone was going to be okay. When morning came, I called the towns below, Point Pleasant, Henderson, all the communities that were supposed to have been hit by the tornado. Everything was fine. No storms, no damage. No one had even heard unusual weather reports. But my logbook was full of notes about the tornado warning, weather data that matched what I'd heard on the radio, damage reports from specific addresses in Point Pleasant. I started wondering if I was losing my mind. That's when I saw the shadow. It was the 4th night, just after sunset. I was doing my equipment checks when something huge passed over the station. The shadow covered all my windows at once, something bigger than any bird, bigger than any plane. I ran outside, but there was nothing in the sky. Just the first few stars coming out. But the shadow had been real. I felt it. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the few seconds it lasted. The hair on my arms stood up like I'd touched a live wire. And all my radios were going crazy. Every frequency at once was picking up voices. Emergency dispatchers, search teams, weather services, aircraft control towers, all talking about events I couldn't see, places I knew were quiet, disasters that weren't happening. In the middle of all that chaos, I heard something else. A sound that didn't come from any human throat. It was like static, but organized, like someone was trying to talk through electronic interference. The sound rose and fell in patterns that almost seemed like words. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'd been in the Navy during World War II, heard enemy radio transmissions in languages I didn't understand. But this was different. This wasn't human at all. The static voice came again, longer this time. And somehow, impossible as it sounds, I started to understand it. It was trying to tell me something about time, about events that were coming, about my job here at the station. The radio voices went silent all at once. Every frequency went dead. I stood alone on my ridge, under the stars, with the feeling that something enormous was watching me. When I went back inside, all my equipment was working perfectly again. But there was a message written on my logbook in handwriting that wasn't mine. November 15th. Bridge falls. 46 dead. You will see. November 15th was 8 days away. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I locked it in my desk drawer and tried to pretend I'd never seen it. But I couldn't stop thinking about the Silver Bridge. November 15th, 1967. Exactly 1 year later. The Silver Bridge collapsed during evening rush hour. 46 people died. I know because I was there, watching it happen from my window, listening to the real emergency broadcasts on my radio. The same broadcasts I'd heard a year earlier, word for word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the week leading up to that night. After I found the message in my logbook, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bridge falling, heard people screaming, felt the cold air that came with that giant shadow. I tried to convince myself it was all stress, too many years alone on the mountain, too much coffee, too little sleep. But the voices kept coming. Every night, my radios picked up emergency calls from the future. Car accidents that wouldn't happen for weeks. Forest fires that were months away. Search and rescue operations for people who were still safe at home. And I started seeing the creature. It would circle the station just after dark, casting that impossible shadow over the buildings. Sometimes I caught glimpses of it directly. Huge wings that didn't move like a bird's. Glowing red eyes that seemed to be watching me personally. The temperature dropped every time it appeared. My radio equipment would surge with power, picking up voices from different times, different disasters. I tried to research what I was seeing. Drove down to the library in Point Pleasant and looked through old newspapers, folklore collections, anything that might explain a giant winged creature in West Virginia. That's when I found the pattern. Every major disaster in the area for the past 50 years had been preceded by sightings of what people called the Mothman. Miners had seen it before cave-ins. Families had spotted it before floods. It always appeared in the weeks before something terrible happened. But here's what really scared me. In every case, someone had tried to warn people about the coming disaster, and no one ever believed them. I thought about calling the authorities, telling them about the bridge, but what would I say? That a giant moth creature was using my radio equipment to send messages from the future? They'd lock me up. Instead, I started monitoring the bridge more carefully. I set up a spotting scope at my window and took notes every day. Traffic patterns, structural details, anything that might give me a clue about when or how it would fall. The creature seemed to approve. Every night, it circled closer to the station. The radio voices became clearer, more detailed. I learned things about disasters that hadn't happened yet. A chemical plant explosion in February, a school bus accident in March, a massive flood in April. All of it was coming through my radios with perfect clarity. Dates, times, locations, casualty numbers. I was becoming some kind of prophet, and I hated every minute of it. On November 10th, 5 days before the bridge was supposed to fall, I made a decision. I was going to warn people anyway. I called the bridge maintenance office and told them I'd observed some structural problems that needed inspection. "Sir, the bridge was inspected just last month. Everything checked out fine. Please, just send someone to take another look. I think there might be metal fatigue in the main suspension components." "Sir, are you an engineer?" "No, but I've been watching this bridge for 23 years, and something doesn't look right." They thanked me for my concern and hung up. I called the local newspapers, the radio stations, the emergency management office, anyone who might listen. Nobody took me seriously. On November 13th, 2 days before the collapse, I got desperate. I drove down to Point Pleasant and parked by the bridge, spent the whole day talking to anyone who would listen. "Don't use the bridge on November 15th. Something's going to happen. Please, just stay away that day." People thought I was crazy. Some were polite about it, others weren't. By evening, I was exhausted and defeated. I drove back up to my station and sat in my chair, staring at the radio equipment. That night, the creature landed on my roof. I could hear its talons gripping the metal, scratching as it moved around up there. The whole building shook under its weight. My radios came alive with voices from November 15th. Emergency dispatchers coordinating the rescue, divers searching the river for survivors, family members calling in, desperate for news about loved ones who'd been on the bridge. And then I heard my own voice again. "Point Pleasant Dispatch. This is Ridge Station. I can confirm the bridge collapse. I'm watching it happen right now." Future me sounded calm, professional, like I was just reporting another routine emergency. "Ridge Station. How many vehicles were on the bridge when it fell?" "I count at least 30 cars, maybe more. They're all in the river now." I felt sick. In 2 days, I was going to sit here and watch dozens of people die. And I was going to sound calm about it because that was my job. The creature's voice came through the static again. This time, I understood it perfectly. It was telling me that this was my purpose, that I'd been chosen to witness these events and report them, that trying to change them would only make things worse. I'd become the bridge between human emergency response and something vast and incomprehensible, something that existed outside normal time and could see all possible futures. The creature showed me what would happen if I managed to prevent the bridge collapse. I saw timelines where the disaster was delayed but made worse. More people died in the alternate versions. The entire town was destroyed instead of just the bridge. I understood then that I wasn't supposed to prevent anything. I was supposed to observe, to record, to be a witness. On November 14th, I made peace with it. I sent letters to my family, explaining as much as I could. I updated my will. I made sure my replacement at the Forest Service would know how to operate all the equipment. Then I sat down at my radio and waited. The creature circled all day, lower and lower. By evening, it was perched on the radio tower just outside my window, 8 feet tall, wings that spanned the entire width of the tower, eyes like red searchlights pointed directly at me. It wasn't there to threaten me. It was there to make sure I did my job. At 5:04 p.m. on November 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River, and I sat at my radio, watching it happen, reporting the disaster with professional calm, while 46 people died in the cold water below. Just like I'd heard myself do a year earlier. Watching the bridge collapse was the worst thing I'd ever experienced, and I'd seen combat in the Pacific. The main suspension cable snapped first. I watched it whip through the air like a massive metal snake. Then the roadway tilted, twisted, and fell in sections. Cars slid off into the river, their headlights disappearing under the dark water. I sat at my radio and did my job, coordinated with emergency services, provided information about what I could see from my vantage point, helped guide rescue boats to the areas where people might still be alive. But inside, I was screaming, because I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, every disaster I'd heard on the radio came true. The chemical plant explosion in February, the school bus accident in March, the flood in April, and every time I received advance warning through my equipment. Days or weeks ahead, I'd hear the emergency broadcasts from events that hadn't happened yet. I tried preventing them, made anonymous phone calls, sent letters to authorities, even showed up in person to warn people when I could. Sometimes it worked partially. Fewer people died than the radio voices had predicted. But something always happened. The disasters couldn't be stopped, only reduced. The creature, I'd started thinking of it as the Mothman, like the old stories, appeared before each event. It would perch somewhere I could see it and watch me struggle with the advanced knowledge. I began to understand what it was studying. The Mothman wasn't causing these disasters. It was observing how humans responded to inevitable tragedy, how we tried to save each other, how we dealt with loss and fear, and the knowledge that terrible things were coming. I was its research assistant. By summer of 1968, the strain was breaking me down. I'd lost 40 pounds, barely slept, jumped at every sound. The radio voices were constant now, overlapping reports from disasters months or years in the future. I knew about plane crashes that wouldn't happen until 1970. Industrial accidents scheduled for 1,975. Natural disasters that were decades away. And I couldn't save anyone. That's when I decided to destroy the equipment. On July 4th, 1968, while fireworks were going off in the valley below, I took an axe to every radio in the station, smashed the weather monitoring gear, cut every antenna cable I could reach. For about an hour, I felt free. No voices from the future, no knowledge of coming disasters, just blessed silence. Then the Mothman landed on my roof again. This time, it didn't just perch there. It tore the roof open like cardboard and dropped down into my station. 8 feet tall, wings that filled the room when they spread, eyes like burning coals that stared into my soul. And it spoke to me directly, not through radio static. The voice was like wind through metal, like electronic signals translated into something my human brain could process. It told me things about time and space and the nature of reality that I still don't fully understand. But the message was clear. I could choose to cooperate, or I could go insane from the knowledge I already carried. There was no going back to my old life. I'd seen too much, heard too much. The future disasters were burned into my memory, and knowing about them without being able to prevent them would drive me crazy. The Mothman offered me a different option. Instead of fighting the role, I could embrace it. Become a permanent observer. Use the advance warnings to save who I could, when I could, while accepting that the larger pattern of disasters couldn't be changed. In exchange, it would give me the tools to maintain my sanity, a way to compartmentalize the knowledge, to function as both human and prophet. I looked around my destroyed station, at the smashed equipment, at the creature that had been studying human disaster response through my eyes for over a year. And I said yes. The Mothman touched my forehead with one clawed hand. Reality shifted around me. I could suddenly see time the way it did, not as a straight line but as a vast web of possibilities. I saw all the disasters that were coming, but I also saw all the people who could be saved if the warnings reached the right people at the right time. When it was over, my equipment was repaired. Better than new. Enhanced in ways that would let me receive clearer signals from further in the future. But I was different too. The constant anxiety was gone. The crushing weight of future knowledge had been organized, filed away in parts of my mind that wouldn't break under the pressure. I could still feel sadness about the disasters I couldn't prevent, but I also felt purpose about the lives I could save. The Mothman spread its wings and launched itself through the broken roof. Before it disappeared into the night sky, it spoke one more time. November 1970. Flight 932, you will save 17. 3 years later, Southern Airways Flight 932 would crash near Huntington, West Virginia, killing 75 people. But because of an anonymous phone call I made to the airline the day before, 17 passengers changed their travel plans and lived. I never knew who they were. But somewhere, 17 families stayed whole because I'd learned to work with the creature instead of fighting it. That was 40 years ago now. I'm still here at Point Pleasant Ridge Station. The Forest Service thinks I'm the most dedicated employee they've ever had. Never missed a day, never taken a vacation, always at my post when emergencies happen. They don't know that I'm not quite human anymore. The Mothman visits every few months. Sometimes it just circles the station, sometimes it lands and we communicate about upcoming disasters. It's gotten easier to understand over the years, and I think I've gotten easier for it to work with. We've developed a system. I receive advance warnings about disasters through my enhanced equipment. The signals come from anywhere between a few days and several decades in the future. I evaluate each one to determine how much can be changed without creating worse alternatives. Small accidents can often be prevented entirely. A warning phone call here, an anonymous tip there. People change their plans, take different routes, delay their trips. Major disasters can only be reduced. I can't stop an earthquake, but I can make sure the right rescue equipment is in the right place. I can't prevent a plane crash, but I can ensure some passengers aren't on that particular flight. The important thing is that I never claim credit. I never try to explain how I know what's coming. I just provide information through channels that allow people to make their own decisions. Over the decades, I've saved thousands of lives. Not from dying. Everyone dies eventually. But from dying in those specific disasters, at those specific times. It's not perfect. People still die in accidents I can't prevent or haven't seen yet. But the overall pattern is better than it would have been without the warnings. The Mothman gets its research data about human disaster response. I get to help people in the only way that's possible when you know too much about the future. And sometimes, late at night when the station is quiet, I remember what it was like to be fully human. To worry about ordinary things like paying bills and finding someone to share your life with. I gave all that up to become something else. A bridge between human time and cosmic time. A translator between the need to help and the reality that some things can't be changed. The loneliness is the hardest part. I can't have close relationships when I know how and when people are going to die. I can't live in the towns below when I hear their future disasters broadcasting through my equipment every day. But I have a purpose that's bigger than any individual human life, including my own. Last week, I received a transmission about an earthquake that won't hit California until 2045. The casualties would be enormous, unless the right building codes are implemented in the next few years. I'm working on a way to get that information to the appropriate authorities. Anonymously, of course, through channels that will make them think they discovered the geological risk through normal research. By the time it happens, I'll probably be gone. But the warnings I plant now will save lives decades from now. The Mothman has been circling the station more frequently lately. I think it's getting ready to choose a replacement for me. Someone younger, with better equipment and more years ahead of them to do this job. When that time comes, I'll train them as well as I can. Teach them how to live with future knowledge. How to save who you can while accepting what you can't change. And maybe, if I've earned it, I'll be allowed to become fully human again for whatever time I have left. Until then, I'm here at Point Pleasant Ridge Station, monitoring the emergency frequencies, watching for signs of disasters that haven't happened yet. Because someone has to stand at the intersection of human time and cosmic time. Someone has to listen to the voices from the future and translate them into warnings that might save lives. My name is Harold Kessler, and I'm the prophet of Point Pleasant Ridge. If you're hearing this recording, it means something big is coming to your area. Check your equipment carefully. Watch for unusual shadows in the sky. And remember, if you see the Mothman, it's not there to hurt you. It's there to offer you a choice. My name is Kate Beaumont, and I've been a forest ranger for 11 years. I specialize in winter survival training, and I thought I knew everything about staying alive in the cold. I was wrong. It was January 1984. And I was leading an advanced winter survival course on Snowshoe Ridge in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. The ridge got its name because it's the only way to travel there in winter. 15 miles of deep snow that'll swallow you whole if you're not wearing snowshoes. I picked this group carefully. Tom Bradley was an Army veteran, tough as nails. Lisa Murphy worked search and rescue in Colorado. The Foster brothers, Jake and Mike, were experienced hunters from upstate New York. Jennifer Walsh was the youngest at 22, but she'd been backpacking since she could walk. These weren't weekend warriors. They were serious people who wanted to learn serious skills. My grandmother used to tell me stories about this place. Grandmère was French-Canadian, and she knew the old tales about winter spirits that made people hungry for things they shouldn't eat. She called them Wendigos. I always figured those stories were just ways to explain why trappers went crazy from isolation and cold. Smart people don't believe in monsters. The weather forecast called for light snow, maybe 6 inches. What we got instead was a full blizzard that came out of nowhere. By the second day, we had 3 feet on the ground and no sign of stopping. The temperature dropped to 25 below zero, cold enough to kill you in minutes without proper gear. We were supposed to split into pairs for a solo exercise. Build your own shelter, survive one night alone, then rejoin the group. It was meant to build confidence. Instead, it became a nightmare. Tom, Lisa, and Jake were the first group to go out. They each carried emergency beacons, flares, enough food for 2 days. The plan was simple. Hike 2 miles north, make camp, survive the night, return in the morning. They never came back. I waited until noon the next day before starting a search. Mike Foster was beside himself. His brother Jake was missing. Jennifer kept checking her watch every 5 minutes. The wind was howling so loud we had to shout to hear each other. "Maybe they're just waiting out the storm," Jennifer said, but her voice was shaky. The cold was getting to all of us, even with our best winter gear. That's when we started hearing the voices. At first, it sounded like someone calling for help. The wind carries sound funny in a blizzard, but this was different. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees in ways that didn't make sense. "That's Jake," Mike said, standing up from our shelter. I know my brother's voice, but the voice was calling from 3 different directions at once. I made the decision that probably saved our lives. That first day, we stayed put. In my 11 years as a ranger, I'd seen what happened to people who chased voices in a storm. They wandered in circles until they froze to death. That night, the temperature dropped even further. I'd never felt cold like that. It went right through our winter-rated sleeping bags, through layers of fleece and wool, straight into our bones. Jennifer's teeth were chattering so hard, I thought they might break. "This isn't normal cold," she whispered. She was right, but I didn't know how to explain it. The cold felt alive somehow, like it was hunting us. Mike found the first shelter the next morning. It was one of the emergency shelters the missing group had built, but something was terribly wrong with it. The walls were torn apart from the inside, not outside like you'd expect from an animal attack. There was blood in the snow, dark red splashes that looked black in the gray morning light. But there were no bodies. "Jesus Christ," Mike breathed, staring at the bloody snow. "What happened here?" I knelt down to examine the scene, trying to think like the professional I was trained to be. The shelter had been properly built. Tom knew what he was doing, but something had destroyed it with incredible force. Sleeping bags were shredded, not cut or torn, but shredded like something had clawed through them. "Look at this," Jennifer called from the other side of the campsite. She was pointing at tracks in the snow. They started out normal, boot prints from someone wearing snowshoes. But as the trail led away from the destroyed shelter, the prints changed. They got longer, deeper, and the spacing between them increased, like whoever was walking had started taking impossibly long strides. "These don't look right," I said, following the tracks with my eyes. They disappeared into the dark woods ahead of us. That's when we found the food. All of their emergency rations were gone, not just eaten, completely consumed, even the packaging. I found wrapper scraps that looked like they'd been chewed and swallowed. Who eats plastic in a survival situation? "Maybe they were starving," Mike suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "People do crazy things when they're desperate." I shook my head. "It's only been 2 days. You don't get desperate enough to eat plastic in 2 days." We followed the tracks deeper into the woods. The wind had died down, but the cold was getting worse if that was possible. Every breath felt like ice forming in my lungs. Jennifer was moving slower, and I could see that Mike was struggling too. After about a mile, we found more evidence. A deer carcass, partially eaten, but not by any animal I'd ever seen. The meat had been torn away in chunks, and there were bite marks that looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. The teeth marks were too big, too sharp. "What kind of animal eats like this?" Jennifer asked. I didn't answer because I was starting to remember my grandmother's stories. In the old tales, people who got too hungry in the winter would start craving meat. Any meat. And once they started eating it raw, once they got that first taste of blood, they couldn't stop. That's when we heard Lisa's voice. "Help me," it called from somewhere ahead of us. "Please, I'm hurt." Mike started moving toward the voice immediately, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said. "That's Lisa," he insisted. "She needs help." But something was wrong with the voice. It sounded like Lisa, but the words were too clear, too perfect. When you're injured and hypothermic in a blizzard, your speech gets slurred. You can barely form words. This voice was calling for help, but it sounded like someone reading from a script. "Help me," it called again. And this time I was sure it was coming from two different directions at once. "We need to go back," I said. "Like hell," Mike snapped. "That's my brother's girlfriend out there." He broke free from my grip and started trudging through the snow toward the voice. Jennifer and I followed because we couldn't leave him alone, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run the other direction. We found Lisa about 100 yards ahead. At least, we found what was left of her. She was sitting against a tree, and at first glance she looked almost normal. But when we got closer, I could see that something was terribly wrong. Her skin was gray-white, the color of old snow. Her lips were black with frostbite, but she wasn't shivering. Nobody survives that level of hypothermia without shivering. "Lisa?" Mike called out. "Lisa, can you hear me?" She turned to look at us, and that's when I saw her eyes. They were sunken deep into her skull, and they reflected light like an animal's eyes. When she opened her mouth to speak, I saw that her teeth had changed. They were longer, sharper, stained with something dark. "I'm so hungry," she said, and her voice was the same voice we'd heard calling for help. But Lisa's mouth wasn't moving right. The words were coming out, but her lips weren't forming them properly. Jennifer grabbed my arm. "Kate, something's wrong with her." Lisa stood up, and that's when I realized she was taller than before. Not just standing straighter, actually taller. Her limbs looked stretched out, like someone had pulled her bones apart. "I'm so very hungry," she repeated, and this time I could hear something else underneath her voice, something growling. That's when she lunged at Mike. She moved faster than any human should be able to move, especially someone suffering from severe hypothermia. Mike barely had time to raise his arms before she tackled him into the snow. I heard him scream, and then I heard a sound I'll never forget, the sound of teeth tearing through winter clothing and into flesh. I grabbed Jennifer and pulled her behind a tree as Mike's screams echoed through the forest. Lisa, or the thing that had been Lisa, was crouched over him, making wet, tearing sounds. "We have to help him," Jennifer whispered, but she was shaking so hard she could barely talk. I looked around the tree and immediately wished I hadn't. Mike wasn't screaming anymore, and Lisa was feeding. Her face was buried in his chest, and her whole body was shaking with some kind of horrible pleasure. "We have to get out of here," I said, grabbing Jennifer's hand. But it was too late. Lisa had heard us. She raised her head from Mike's body, and her face was covered in blood. But the worst part was that she was still recognizably Lisa. Same blonde hair, same nose, same freckles, but her mouth was full of teeth that belonged on a wolf, and her eyes had gone completely black. "Kate," she said, and her voice sounded almost normal except for a wet clicking sound between words. "I'm still so hungry." We ran. I'd been teaching winter survival for years, and the first rule is never run in deep snow. You'll exhaust yourself in minutes, fall through hidden obstacles, get separated from your group. But sometimes, you have to break the rules to stay alive. Jennifer was right behind me, both of us crashing through the snow as fast as we could manage. Behind us, I could hear Lisa following, but she wasn't struggling with the deep snow like we were. She was moving through it like it wasn't there. "The shelter," I gasped, pointing ahead to where we'd left our camp. "We can get weapons." We had a small emergency axe and some knives. Not much against whatever Lisa had become, but better than nothing. We made it to the shelter, and I immediately started digging through our supplies. Jennifer was watching the tree line, breathing so hard I thought she might hyperventilate. "What was that thing?" she asked. "I don't know," I lied, but I was starting to understand what my grandmother had tried to tell me all those years ago. The Wendigo wasn't just a story, it was real and it was here. That's when Jake appeared at the edge of our camp. He looked normal at first glance, same winter coat, same knit hat, same beard, but he was standing in 3 feet of snow without snowshoes, and he wasn't sinking. "Mike," he called out. "Where's Mike?" His voice sounded wrong too, flat, emotionless, like he was reading words he didn't understand. "Jake," Jennifer said, starting to move toward him. "Jake, something's happened to Lisa. She's—" "Don't," I warned, but she was already walking toward him. Jake smiled, and I saw that his teeth had changed too, not as dramatically as Lisa's, but they were definitely sharper than human teeth should be. "I found Tom," Jake said conversationally. "He tastes different than I expected." That's when Jennifer finally understood what we were dealing with. She stumbled backward, nearly falling in the snow. "Where is everyone going?" Jake continued, tilting his head like a curious dog. "I thought we were all friends." Behind him, Lisa emerged from the trees. She was carrying something in her hands, something that might have been Mike's arm. Blood was dripping from her mouth, steaming in the cold air. "Kate," she called in that horrible cheerful voice, "we saved some for you." Jennifer was hyperventilating now, making small whimpering sounds. I grabbed her hand and started backing toward the other side of our camp. That's when Tom stepped out from behind a tree on that side. He'd changed the most. Tom had been a big man, maybe 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. Whatever was standing in front of us now was at least 7 feet tall and thin as a skeleton. His arms hung down past his knees, and his fingers had grown into claws. His face was still recognizable, but stretched and distorted like someone had pulled it apart. "Training exercise is over, Kate," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through broken glass. "Time for the real lesson." We were surrounded. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out a flare and popped it. The red light flared up between us and Tom, and something amazing happened. He screamed and stumbled backward, covering his face with those long clawed hands. "Fire," I said, understanding suddenly. "They're afraid of fire." I lit 2 more flares and handed one to Jennifer. The creatures, I couldn't think of them as people anymore, kept their distance from the red flames. But flares don't last forever. "What do we do?" Jennifer asked. I was thinking as fast as I could. We had maybe 20 minutes of flare light left. After that, we'd be defenseless against 3 of those things in the middle of a blizzard. "We get to high ground," I said. "Find rocks, build a fire that'll last." "They know this area as well as we do," Jennifer pointed out. She was right. These things had been our students. They knew everything we knew about survival, plus they had supernatural abilities we couldn't match. But they'd also just become something new. They were learning how to be monsters, which meant they might make mistakes. "Stay close," I said, holding my flare out in front of us. "And if we get separated, keep moving toward the ridge. There's an old fire tower up there." We started moving, keeping the creatures at bay with our flares. But I could see them following us through the trees, staying just outside the circle of light. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of eyes reflecting the red glow. Sometimes I'd hear that wet clicking sound they made when they breathed. And sometimes, in the distance, I'd hear other voices calling for help. More people were out here, more victims. Or maybe more of those things, trying to lure us closer. Jennifer was crying now, but she kept moving. The snow was getting deeper as we climbed toward the ridge, and the wind was picking up again. My first flare was starting to sputter. "Kate," Lisa's voice called from somewhere behind us, "you can't run forever." She was right. In this cold, in this terrain, we'd collapse from exhaustion long before we reached safety. And even if we made it to the fire tower, what then? We'd just be trapped in a different place. "There's another way," Tom's voice said, closer than before. "You could join us. The hunger goes away when you feed it." I lit my second flare just as the first one died. In the brief moment of darkness between lights, I saw something huge move through the trees to our left. They were getting bolder. "The stories," I said to Jennifer as we climbed. "My grandmother used to tell stories about these things. Wendigos. They were people once, but they got too hungry in the winter. How do we stop them?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. In the stories, Wendigos were nearly impossible to kill. They were faster and stronger than humans, They could control winter weather, and they could only be destroyed by fire. But we were running out of fire. We reached the fire tower just as my second flare began to die. The old wooden structure stood 30 feet tall, and I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. There was a metal box at the base that should contain emergency supplies. "Please," I whispered, breaking the rusted lock with my axe. "Please let there be something useful." Inside I found exactly what I needed: a kerosene lantern and a half-full container of fuel. I lit it just as my flare went out completely, and the warm yellow light pushed back the darkness. "Up," I told Jennifer. "All the way to the top." The ladder was icy and treacherous, but we climbed as fast as we could. Behind us, I heard the creatures reaching the base of the tower. The wooden structure shook as something heavy started climbing after us. We reached the observation platform at the top, and I slammed the trap door behind us, dropping the latch. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it might give us a few minutes. The platform had windows on all sides, and I could see the whole forest spread out below us. What I saw made my blood freeze. There were lights moving through the trees. Dozens of them. Not flashlights or normal lights, these were the reflected glow of eyes in the darkness. We weren't dealing with just 3 creatures. There was a whole pack of them down there. "How many people have they taken?" Jennifer asked, staring at the lights. I was starting to understand the scope of this nightmare. This wasn't just about my missing students. These things had been hunting in these woods for who knows how long. Every missing hiker, every unexplained disappearance in the winter. They could all be down there now, transformed into something hungry and horrible. The tower shook again as something climbed the outside. "Kate," Tom's voice called from just below the platform. "Let us up. We just want to talk." I looked out the window and saw his elongated face pressed against the glass. His breath fogged the window, but his eyes were completely black. "We have something to show you," he said. That's when I saw him, the real Tom, the human Tom. He was tied to a tree at the edge of the clearing, still alive but barely conscious. As I watched, one of the creatures moved toward him. "We saved him for you," Lisa's voice called from another side of the tower, "but he won't last much longer in this cold. They were using him as bait. They wanted me to come down." "Don't listen to them," Jennifer said. But she was staring at Tom too. "It's a trick." I knew it was a trick, but it was also real. Tom was still alive down there, and these things were going to kill him either way. The only question was whether I'd die trying to save him. "There's something else," I said, remembering more of my grandmother's stories. "The Wendigo curse spreads through cannibalism. If you eat human flesh in the winter, especially if you're starving, the spirit can possess you." "So they were people like us once?" "Yes, and there's still people somewhere inside. That's why they can talk, why they remember us. But the hunger takes over everything else." The platform shook violently as something much larger than the others started climbing the tower. Through the window, I saw a shadow that had to be at least 10 feet tall. "The original," I whispered. "The first one. It's been here longer than the others." The ancient Wendigo reached the platform, and the entire structure groaned under its weight. When it pressed its face against the window, I saw something that barely looked human anymore. Its skull was elongated like a wolf's, its teeth were like broken glass, and its eyes glowed with their own light. "Catherine Beaumont," it said, and its voice was like winter wind through dead trees. "Granddaughter of Marie. She told you the stories. It knew my grandmother. It had been here long enough to know my family. She tried to warn you," the creature continued, "but you didn't listen. You brought them to me. You fed me. That's when I understood the horrible truth. My survival courses hadn't been coincidence. This thing had been watching, waiting. It had been guiding people to this area for years, using their own desire to learn survival skills against them. I was the bait. I always had been. Every winter," it said, "you bring me fresh students, young, strong, eager to learn. They make such good converts." The platform tilted as the creature climbed higher. The old tower wasn't built to support something this massive. "Join us willingly," it said, "and I'll make your death quick." I looked at Jennifer, who was pressed against the opposite wall, holding my axe like it would do any good against these things. She was 22 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and I had led her here. I made my decision. I grabbed the kerosene container and unscrewed the cap. The smell of fuel filled the small platform. "What are you doing?" Jennifer asked. Grandmère said fire was the only thing they truly feared. I said, pulling out my lighter. If I can create enough flame, fast enough, maybe you can get down and run. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. I threw the kerosene out the window onto the creature, clinging to the side of the tower. It screamed and lost its grip, crashing down through the trees below. Then I threw the lantern after it. The tower went up like a torch. The old wood was dry as bone, and the kerosene had splashed everything around the base. Within seconds, the entire structure was engulfed in flames that reached 50 feet into the night sky. I grabbed Jennifer, and we jumped from the platform onto the roof of the supply shed 15 feet below. The fall knocked the wind out of both of us, but we rolled off the roof into a snowbank and started running before the creatures could regroup. Behind us, the Wendigos were screaming. Not human screams. Something much worse. The sound of ancient hunger being burned away. We ran for 3 hours through the blizzard, using the glow of the burning tower as our guide away from the nightmare. Jennifer was tough. She kept up even when the cold and exhaustion should have killed us both. We found a road just as dawn was breaking. A snowplow picked us up an hour later. The official report said our students died in an avalanche. Equipment failure. Exposure. The bodies were never found, which wasn't unusual in winter conditions. I gave my statement to state investigators, who nodded sympathetically and filed everything away. But 3 days later, a man in a black suit visited me in the hospital where I was being treated for frostbite. "Miss Beaumont," he said, sitting down beside my bed. "I understand you had an unusual experience on Snowshoe Ridge." "I don't know what you mean." He smiled. "Your grandmother Marie spoke to my organization several times over the years. About the things that hunt in winter. About the old stories that aren't just stories." I stared at him. "Who are you?" "Someone who believes you," he said. "And someone who needs your help." He told me about a network of people who tracked supernatural threats. Researchers who studied things like Wendigos, trying to understand them, contain them when possible. My survival training and first-hand experience made me valuable. "The fire destroyed the immediate threat," he explained. "But Wendigos are territorial. Other packs will move into the area eventually, and there are similar creatures in other regions. People need to be warned, trained, prepared." I retired from the Forest Service 6 months later. Officially, due to PTSD from the avalanche incident. Unofficially, I started working with a group that most people would never believe exists. I spent the next 10 years developing winter survival protocols that account for supernatural threats, teaching people to recognize the signs, avoid the conditions that create Wendigos, survive encounters if they're unlucky enough to have them. Jennifer joined me after she graduated college. She'd tried to go back to normal life, but the nightmares never stopped. Working with people who understood what we'd been through helped both of us heal. We've prevented dozens of incidents over the years, redirected hiking groups away from active Wendigo territories, educated rangers and rescue workers about warning signs, developed equipment that actually works against supernatural cold. But sometimes we're too late. Last winter, we got reports of missing campers in northern Michigan. By the time we arrived, there were 3 new Wendigos and a pack territory that stretched for 50 square miles. The hunger spreads. It always spreads. That's why I'm telling you this story. If you're reading this, you're probably someone who spends time in winter wilderness. Someone who thinks they know how to survive in extreme conditions. You need to understand that there are some kinds of hunger that survival training can't prepare you for. Some kinds of cold that will kill you no matter how good your equipment is. Some voices in the blizzard that you should never follow, no matter how much they sound like someone you love. My grandmother tried to warn me, but I was too modern, too educated, too skeptical to listen. Don't make the same mistake. The Wendigo is real, and it's always hungry. And winter is coming again. My name is Vincent Romano, but everyone calls me Vinny. I've been a park ranger for 7 years now, working the trails in Dolly Sod's wilderness here in West Virginia. It's not easy work, but I like being alone out there, building trails, fixing bridges, keeping the wilderness safe for hikers. Most people think it's boring work, but I love it. I grew up in Pittsburgh, working construction with my dad until I got tired of the city noise. My family always joked about the old stories from Italy. Monsters in the mountains, things that hunt people. Just stories to scare kids, my dad would say. I believed him. Even when hikers came back talking about seeing 8 men in the woods, I'd laugh it off. Bears, I'd tell them, just big black bears walking on their back legs. Dolly Sods is different from other places. It sits high up on a plateau, almost like an island in the sky. The weather can turn nasty fast, and the fog rolls in so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. There are boulder fields that go on for miles, twisted little trees that look like something from a nightmare, and bogs that smell like rotten eggs. The Cherokee used to avoid this place, called it cursed. Said there were bone stealers up here. I thought that was just tourist nonsense until September of 1973. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was heading out to check on a trail crew that had been working on a new section near Bear Rocks. 3 guys, Jake Morrison, Pete Williams, and a college kid named Sarah Chen. Good workers, all of them. They were supposed to radio in every evening, but I hadn't heard from them in 2 days. The weather had been weird all week, cold for September, with fog that hung around even when the sun was out. My cabin thermometer read 45 degrees that morning. But it felt colder, the kind of cold that gets into your bones. I loaded up my truck with supplies and drove as far as the old logging road would take me. Then it was 3 miles on foot through some of the roughest country in West Virginia. The silence hit me first. No birds. No insects. Even my footsteps seemed too loud. When I got to their camp, I knew something was very wrong. The tents were shredded. Not torn, shredded, like something with huge claws had gone crazy on them. Sleeping bags were scattered everywhere, ripped to pieces. The campfire was cold, days old by the look of it. But what really got to me were the tools. Jake's chainsaw was twisted into a pretzel. The metal blade was bent in a perfect spiral, like someone had heated it up and wound it around a post. But there was no heat source big enough for that kind of work. Pete's trail markers were scattered in a line heading deeper into the woods, and Sarah's surveying equipment was smashed so bad I couldn't tell what most of it used to be. I called out their names, but the only answer was my own echo bouncing off the rocks. Then I found the first bones. They were arranged in a perfect circle around what used to be the cook tent. Clean white bones, picked completely clean, human bones. I'm no doctor, but I grew up hunting with my dad, and I know what human ribs look like when they're not attached to anything anymore. The weird part was how clean they were. Like they'd been boiled and bleached, and they were arranged just so, pointing toward the deeper woods like arrows. I should have radioed for help right then, should have called the state police and gotten out of there, but I needed to find Jake, Pete, and Sarah. They might still be alive somewhere, hurt and waiting for rescue. I followed the bone arrows. The trail led through a section of woods I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of this wilderness. The trees were different here, twisted and stunted, with bark that looked almost black. The ground was soft and spongy, covered in moss that squished under my boots. That's when I found the footprints. They were huge, at least 18 inches long and twice as wide as my size 11 boots. The toe marks were clear in the soft earth, and they had to be from something that walked on 2 feet. The stride was longer than any human could manage, and the depth of the prints meant whatever made them was heavy. Real heavy. I knelt down to get a closer look, and that's when I smelled it. Rotting meat mixed with wet animal fur. Like finding a dead deer that had been sitting in the rain for a week, but stronger. Much stronger. The smell was coming from deeper in the woods, from the direction the footprints were heading. Every instinct I had told me to turn around and run back to my truck, but those were my people out there, my responsibility, so I kept following the trail. The footprints led to a clearing about 50 yards across. At first, I thought it was just another meadow. Then I saw what was in the center. Bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Arranged in careful patterns, like some kind of sick art project. Not just human bones, deer, bear, smaller animals I couldn't identify. But the human bones were special somehow. They were arranged in spirals and circles, stacked in neat piles, some of them carved with marks I didn't recognize. And sitting on top of the biggest pile, like a crown on a throne, was Jake Morrison's hard hat. That's when I heard the sound behind me. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the ground itself. But there was intelligence in it, like language, like something was talking. I turned around slowly, my hand moving to the .38 on my belt. Standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, was something that shouldn't exist. The thing watching me was huge. 9 feet tall, maybe 10, with shoulders broader than any man I'd ever seen. It was covered in dark, matted fur, and its eyes caught what little light filtered through the trees. Intelligent eyes. Human eyes in a face that definitely wasn't human. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. My hand was on my gun, but I couldn't make myself draw it. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. This was something else entirely. The creature made that rumbling sound again, and I heard an answer from somewhere behind me, then another from my left. They were talking to each other. About me. I backed toward my truck, never taking my eyes off the thing in the trees. It didn't follow. Just watched me go with what looked like amusement. Like it was letting me leave because it wanted to, not because it had to. I made it back to my cabin in record time, hands shaking so bad I could barely work the radio. When I finally raised the dispatcher, I tried to explain what I'd seen. Giant footprints. Destroyed equipment. Missing people. Probably a bear, she said. We'll send a team out tomorrow. But I knew what I'd seen wasn't a bear. That night, I sat in my cabin with every light on and my shotgun across my knees. Around midnight, I heard something moving around outside. Footsteps. Big ones. They circled the cabin 3 times, then stopped at my front door. The door handle turned. I had that door locked and bolted, but the handle turned anyway, slowly. Like whatever was outside wanted me to know it was there. The door didn't open, it held. But the message was clear. The locks were just a polite suggestion. The footsteps moved away, but I didn't sleep that night. The search team came the next morning, 2 state troopers and a ranger from the district office. We hiked back to the campsite, but it wasn't the same. The destroyed equipment was still there, but the bones were gone. Every single one, even the hard hat was missing. Bears, said one of the troopers, looking at the shredded tents. Probably a sow with cubs. They can do a lot of damage when they're protecting their young. I showed them the footprints, but overnight, rain had washed away the clear ones. What was left could have been made by anything, they said. The bone clearing was empty except for some disturbed earth that could have been from deer bedding down. They filed a report listing Jake, Pete, and Sarah as missing, presumed dead from animal attack. Case closed. But I knew better. Over the next week, I started finding things. My trail markers moved during the night, rearranged to point in directions that led nowhere. Equipment left outside my cabin was bent and twisted, but never actually broken. It was like something was playing with me. The weird thing was how smart it seemed. My chainsaw disappeared one night, but I found it the next morning hanging from a tree branch 20 feet up. No way a bear could do that. And carved into the bark next to it were symbols, lines, and circles that looked almost like writing. I started carrying my camera everywhere, hoping to get proof. On Thursday, I thought I had it. I was checking a section of trail near Red Creek when I saw one of them moving through the trees about 100 yards away. I got 3 pictures before it noticed me. When I developed the film, all 3 shots were just blurry shadows. The camera had been working fine before and after, but something about these creatures messed with the equipment. Friday night, they came closer. I was eating dinner when I heard voices outside. Human voices, calling my name. Jake's voice, clear as day, asking for help. Then Sarah, crying and scared, begging me to come find her. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped onto the porch. Jake, Sarah, where are you? The voices came from different directions now, leading me away from the cabin and toward the woods. But something was wrong with them. They sounded flat, like someone playing a recording. And when I listened close, I could hear something else underneath, that same rumbling language I'd heard in the clearing. They were using my friends' voices to try to lure me into the woods. I went back inside and locked the door, but the voices continued all night. Sometimes Jake, sometimes Pete, sometimes Sarah, always asking me to come help them, to come into the woods where they were waiting. Saturday morning, I found fresh footprints all around my cabin. Not just one set, at least 6 different ones, all huge, all clearly not human. They'd surrounded the place while I slept. And nailed to my front door was a human femur bone, carved with those same strange symbols. The message was clear. They weren't hiding anymore. That afternoon, I drove into town and tried to convince the sheriff to send more people. Showed him the bone, the pictures, described what I'd seen. He listened politely, then suggested I might want to take some time off. Get some rest. Maybe see a doctor about stress. Nobody believed me. When I got back to my cabin that evening, I found my CB radio antenna twisted into a knot. My truck's tires had been slashed, but not with a knife. These were claw marks, deep gouges that went right through the steel belting. I was trapped. And as the sun went down, I could hear them moving in the woods around my cabin, more of them than before. They weren't just watching anymore. They were getting ready. Sunday night, they made their first real move. I was sitting in my front room, shotgun loaded and ready, when something hit the side of my cabin so hard the whole building shook. It sounded like a tree falling over, but I knew better. Then another hit, this time on the back wall. Then the roof. They were testing the structure, seeing how solid it was. The attacks came in a pattern: front, back, side, roof, then silence for exactly 3 minutes before starting over. It went on for hours. They weren't trying to break in yet, just letting me know they could whenever they wanted. Around 3 in the morning, everything went quiet. I thought maybe they'd given up. But then I heard something I'll never forget. Singing. It was Sarah's voice, but wrong somehow. She was singing Amazing Grace, just like she used to around the campfire, but the tune was off. The words were slurred, and it was coming from inside my walls. I pressed my ear to the wood and could hear movement in the crawl space under my cabin. Something big was down there, right under my feet, using a dead girl's voice to drive me crazy. I fired 3 shots through the floor. The singing stopped, but I heard something scramble away underneath. When I checked the next morning, there were tunnels dug under my foundation. Not animal burrows. These were big enough for a man to crawl through, but the dirt was pushed out in perfect piles, like they'd used tools. Monday, I tried to hike out to the main road. I made it about 2 miles before I found my path blocked. Trees. Dozens of them, all fallen across the trail in a line. But they hadn't been cut down or blown over by wind. They'd been pulled out of the ground, roots and all, and laid down like a fence. Some of these trees were 4 feet thick and must have weighed tons. No machine could have moved them, especially not way out here. And they were arranged too perfectly to be natural. Someone, or something, had built a wall to keep me in. I tried 3 different routes out of the wilderness that day. All blocked the same way. They weren't just trapping me in my cabin. They'd trapped me in the entire northern section of Dolly Sods. That night, they started the real psychological warfare. First, they used Pete's voice calling from just outside my windows. Then Jake's laugh echoing through the woods. Then Sarah crying for help from a dozen different directions at once. But worst of all was when they used my own voice. I heard myself talking outside my cabin, having conversations with people who weren't there. Heard myself telling my mom I was fine, telling dispatch everything was normal, even heard myself singing my dad's old Italian songs. It was my voice exactly, but I wasn't saying any of it. They'd been listening to me long enough to learn how I sounded. Tuesday, I found evidence they'd been in my cabin while I slept. My food had been rearranged. Not taken, they could have cleaned me out if they wanted to. Just moved around, organized in patterns that didn't make sense. My clothes were folded differently. My books were stacked in new piles. Worst of all, there were muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom and back. Huge footprints, still damp. They'd stood next to my bed while I was sleeping. I stopped sleeping after that. Couldn't risk it. I'd catch an hour here and there, sitting up in my chair, shotgun in my lap, but never real sleep. By Wednesday, I was seeing things that probably weren't there. Shadows moving when there was no light to cast them. Faces in the windows that vanished when I looked directly at them. But I know what I saw Wednesday night was real. I was standing watch at my front window when I spotted movement at the edge of my clearing. One of them stepped out of the trees, bold as brass, and just stood there, looking at my cabin. It was huge, easily 12 feet tall, with scars across its chest and face like it had been in fights before. Old fights. This one had tangled with people and survived. Hanging from a cord around its neck was a necklace made of human finger bones. In its hands was a spear tipped with what looked like a sharpened human femur. It wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted me to see it. Wanted me to know exactly what I was up against. We stared at each other for a long minute, then it threw back its head and made a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, part howl, part roar, part human scream. The sound echoed off the rocks and came back from all directions as others answered. I wasn't dealing with just one creature. I was surrounded by an entire pack. Thursday morning, I found my water line had been cut. Not broken. Cut clean through with something sharp. My generator had been moved 20 feet from where I'd left it, and the fuel tank was empty. Not stolen, emptied out on the ground in a perfect circle around my cabin. They were making sure I couldn't last much longer. That afternoon, I tried one more time to signal for help. I'd saved the batteries for my emergency radio, hoping to reach a helicopter or maybe a plane passing overhead. I climbed up on my roof with the antenna and started broadcasting a mayday. "This is Ranger Romano at Dolly Sods. I need immediate assistance. I'm trapped by hostile forces. I repeat, I need immediate extraction." The response came back clear as day. "Ranger Romano, this is dispatch. You sound fine to me. Everything okay out there?" It was my own voice answering me. They'd learned to use the radio. Thursday night, they made their move. I was down to my last few shells for the shotgun and maybe 2 hours of battery left in my flashlight. The cabin was surrounded. I could see shapes moving in the darkness. At least 8 or 10 of them, all huge, all coordinated. The big one, the leader with the bone necklace, stepped into my yard. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It looked almost human, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too tall, too muscular, too intelligent. Its eyes reflected light like an animal's, but there was something behind them that was definitely not animal. It spoke, not the rumbling language I'd heard before. English. Slow and careful, like it was learning the words as it said them. "Vinny Romano," it said in a voice like gravel grinding together. "We know you. We want you." Then it smiled, showing teeth that belonged in a shark's mouth. "You run, we hunt, you hide, we find." Behind it, the others started moving closer to my cabin. "You're strong, you make good bones." That's when I realized what had happened to Jake, Pete, and Sarah. What would happen to me if I didn't get out of there? The attack started 30 seconds later. They came from all sides at once. The front windows exploded inward as 2 of them crashed through. The back door splintered like paper when another one kicked it down. Something heavy landed on the roof so hard I thought the whole cabin might collapse. I started shooting. The shotgun bucked in my hands as I put a load of buckshot center mass into the closest creature. It staggered back but didn't fall. Dark blood splattered the wall behind it, but the thing just looked down at the wounds and kept coming. I pumped and fired again. This time it went down, but I could hear it moving on the floor. Not dead, just hurt and angry. The leader crashed through what was left of my front door. Up close, it was even bigger than I'd thought. Had to duck to fit through the doorframe. The necklace of finger bones clattered as it moved. "Vinny Romano," it said again, still in that grinding voice. "Time to come." I put a shell right in its face. The blast knocked it backward, and this time it stayed down. But I was out of ammo, and there were still more of them coming. I grabbed my emergency axe from beside the fireplace and swung it at the closest creature. The blade bit deep into its shoulder, and it roared with pain and rage. But instead of backing off, it grabbed the axe handle and yanked it out of my hands, wood and all. Then it backhanded me across the room. I hit the wall hard enough to see stars. When my vision cleared, 3 of them were standing over me. One was bleeding from my shotgun blast, another had my axe buried in its shoulder, but they were all very much alive. The leader wasn't dead either. It was sitting up, one side of its face torn up from the buckshot, but its eyes were still bright and angry. It said something in that rumbling language, and the others grabbed me by the arms. They were taking me alive. They dragged me outside and toward the woods. I fought as hard as I could, but it was like trying to wrestle with bulldozers. These things were impossibly strong. But as we reached the tree line, I heard something that gave me hope. A helicopter. The distant whop 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 of rotor blades cutting through the night air, getting closer. The creatures heard it too. They stopped dragging me and looked up at the sky. The leader barked something in their language, and suddenly they were all talking at once, agitated and angry. They didn't like the helicopter. That gave me an idea. I still had my emergency flare gun in my jacket pocket. If I could get it out and fire it, the helicopter might see the signal, might investigate. One of the creatures holding me loosened its grip to listen to the leader's orders. I twisted my right arm free and went for the flare gun. The creature saw what I was doing and lunged for me, but I was already pulling the trigger. The red flare shot up into the night sky like a 4th of July rocket, burning bright enough to light up the whole clearing. The creatures roared and covered their eyes. Apparently, they didn't like bright lights any more than they liked helicopters. I broke free and ran. Behind me, I could hear them crashing through the woods in pursuit. They were faster than me. Even in the dark woods they knew better than I did. But the flare had done its job. The helicopter was definitely coming this way now. I made it about a quarter mile before they caught me. The leader tackled me from behind, slamming me into the ground so hard I felt ribs crack. When I tried to get up, it put one massive hand on my back and pressed down. I couldn't move. "No, run," it said in that grinding voice. "Time to die now." It raised something over its head. That spear with the sharpened bone tip. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, I could see the point was already stained with old blood. But before it could strike, the helicopter arrived. It came in fast and low, searchlight blazing like a fallen star. The beam swept across the woods and found us just as the creature was bringing the spear down. The light hit it full in the face, and the thing let out a howl that probably woke up half the county. It stumbled backward, clawing at its eyes. The helicopter pilot had seen everything. The aircraft settled into a hover directly overhead, rotor wash whipping the trees into a frenzy. The creatures scattered, but not far. They stayed just outside the circle of light, waiting. A voice came down from a bullhorn. "This is West Virginia State Police. Are you Ranger Romano?" I waved my arms and shouted back, "Get me out of here, now." A rope ladder dropped from the helicopter. I grabbed it and started climbing as fast as my broken ribs would let me. Below, I could see the creatures moving back toward the light, no longer afraid now that their eyes had adjusted. The leader, its face still bloody from my shotgun blast, looked up at me with what I can only describe as respect, like it was acknowledging a worthy opponent. Then it called out something in that grinding voice that I understood, even though it wasn't in English. "This isn't over." The helicopter lifted off just as the creatures reached the spot where the ladder had been. I looked down and saw 8 or 10 of them standing in the clearing, watching me escape. The leader raised its spear in what might have been a salute, or a promise. The helicopter took me to the hospital in Elkins, where the doctors patched up my ribs and treated me for exhaustion and exposure. The state police interviewed me 3 times, but they didn't believe a word I said about what really happened. "Probably a bear," the detective said, "just like everyone else, maybe a whole family of them. Bears can get pretty aggressive when they're protecting territory." The official report listed Jake Morrison, Pete Williams, and Sarah Chen as victims of animal attack. My cabin was written off as destroyed by the same animals. Case closed. But I know what really happened out there. They transferred me to an office job after I got out of the hospital, said I needed time to recover from my trauma. The truth is, I can't go back into the deep woods anymore. Every shadow might be one of them watching. Every strange sound might be them talking in that language I don't understand. I tried to warn other rangers about what's really out there, but they look at me the same way the police did, like I'm the crazy one. The thing is, it's still happening. 3 hikers went missing in Dolly Sods last month. The search teams found their campsite destroyed, equipment scattered and twisted. The official cause was listed as bear attack, but I know better. A hunter found human bones arranged in patterns near Red Creek last week. The rangers cleaned it up before the media could get pictures. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working late at the office, I get radio calls on the emergency frequency. Voices asking for help, voices of people who've been missing for months or years. Sometimes I hear my own voice calling back to them. They're still out there, still hunting, still collecting bones for whatever twisted purpose drives them. And sometimes, when the wind is right and I'm working late, I swear I can hear that grinding voice from my dreams. "Vinny Romano, We remember you. We're waiting." The helicopter pilot who saved me retired 2 weeks after our encounter. He won't talk about what he saw that night, but I heard through the grapevine that he moved to Florida. As far from the mountains as he could get. Smart man. I've been keeping track of the incidents, mapping them out on a wall chart in my apartment. The pattern is clear. They're expanding their territory, moving into areas where they've never been seen before, getting bolder. Sooner or later, someone's going to get proof. Pictures that don't come out blurry, video that shows what's really happening out there. Witnesses that can't be dismissed as crazy. And when that day comes, people will finally understand what I learned in those woods. We're not alone in these mountains. We never were. The creatures that call themselves the bone collectors have been here longer than any of us. They've been watching, learning, adapting, and now they're hunting. God help whoever goes into Dolly Sods next. Asterisk, asterisk. My name is Douglas Patterson, and I'm about to tell you something that'll make you think I've lost my mind. But before you write me off as some crazy old forest ranger, let me tell you who I am. I've been working fire suppression in the Cranberry Mountain Wilderness for 5 years now. Before that, I spent 3 years in Korea with the Marines, saw things that would make most folks lose sleep for months. Point is, I'm not the kind of man who jumps at shadows or makes up stories to get attention. I know the difference between reality and fear, between what's possible and what's just your mind playing tricks on you. The Cranberry Wilderness covers over 35,000 acres of the roughest, wildest country you'll find anywhere in West Virginia. Most of it's never been logged, never been touched by roads or power lines. It's the kind of place where you can walk for days without seeing another human being, where the rhododendron grows so thick you need a machete to get through it, where caves run so deep nobody's ever mapped them all. I work alone most of the time, stationed up in Fire Tower 7, about 12 miles from the nearest dirt road. My job is to watch for smoke, monitor weather conditions, and coordinate with suppression crews when lightning strikes start fires. During drought years like this one, August of 1961, I might go weeks without seeing another person except when the supply truck comes by or when a fire crew needs to work my section. The local folks have always told strange stories about these mountains. Cherokee families that still live in the area talk about shapeshifters and wolfmen that hunt in the deep woods. Old-timers whose families came over from Scotland brought their own stories about werewolves and things that walk on 2 legs but ain't human. I always figured it was just mountain folklore, the kind of tales people tell to scare kids away from wandering too far into the wilderness alone. My family's got a military tradition going back 3 generations. My grandfather fought in France during the Great War, my father stormed beaches in the Pacific, and I did my time in the frozen hills of Korea. We're practical men, not given to flights of fancy. When my grandfather used to talk about impossible enemies he'd faced in the trenches, I thought he was just dealing with war memories the best way he could. Now, I'm not so sure. The trouble started on August 15th, middle of the worst drought we'd seen in 20 years. Fire danger was at maximum level, which meant any spark could turn into a major blaze in minutes. I'd been alone in my tower for 6 days straight, monitoring weather conditions and scanning the horizon for the smallest wisp of smoke. That morning, lightning struck a ridge about 8 miles southeast of my position. I could see the smoke column rising through my binoculars, small at first, but growing steadily in the dry conditions. I radioed headquarters and requested an immediate suppression crew. Fire Chief Frank Morrison dispatched 8 men under Crew Chief Mike Romano. These weren't rookies. Romano had been fighting fires for 15 years, and most of his crew were experienced veterans. They knew their business, knew how to handle wilderness fires, and they were well equipped with modern suppression gear. The crew reached the fire site around noon and radioed that they were beginning initial attack operations. Everything seemed routine. Romano reported the fire was contained to about 2 acres of mixed hardwood and pine, with moderate wind conditions and good access for equipment. He estimated they'd have it cold before sunset. That was the last normal radio transmission I received. At 2:17 p.m., I heard Romano's voice crackling through the static. "Tower 7, this is Suppression 4. We've got some kind of problem here. Requesting immediate backup." I keyed my microphone. "Suppression 4, what's your status? Describe your problem." Long pause. In the background, I could hear men shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. Then Romano came back on, and his voice had changed. He sounded scared, which was something I'd never heard from him before. Tower 7, we're dealing with aggressive wildlife. Large animals interfering with operations. They're not acting right. Request immediate backup and authorization to abandon suppression. I tried to raise them again, but got nothing but static. That's when I started to feel the first touch of real unease. For the next 4 hours, I tried every 15 minutes to raise Romano's crew on the radio. Nothing, just empty static where their voices should have been. By sunset, I was getting seriously worried. In 5 years of fire service, I'd never had a crew go completely silent during active operations. At dawn the next morning, I climbed down from my tower and hiked the 8 miles to their last known position. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd been protecting. The fire was out. That was the first strange thing. Not suppressed, not contained, just out. Like it had burned itself clean and stopped spreading on its own. But fires don't behave that way, especially not in drought conditions with steady wind. A fire that size should have kept spreading until it hit a natural fire break or ran out of fuel. Romano's equipment was scattered across a 100-yard area like a tornado had hit it. Shovels bent in half, axes with handles snapped clean through, water tanks punctured by something that left tears instead of clean holes. A Pulaski, that's a combination axe and hoe that weighs about 4 pounds, was embedded in a tree trunk 8 feet off the ground. I pulled it out and examined it. The steel head was twisted like someone had grabbed it and wrung it out like a wet towel. But there were no bodies, no blood, no sign of where 8 grown men had gone. What I did find were tracks. I've been hunting since I was old enough to hold a rifle, and I know every animal track in these mountains. Black bear, white-tailed deer, wild boar, bobcat, coyote. I can identify them all, tell you how old they are, which direction the animal was moving, whether it was running or walking. These tracks were different. They looked almost like wolf prints, but bigger. Much bigger. The front pads were the size of my palm, with claw marks that gouged deep scratches in the rocky soil. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. Some of the tracks showed heel impressions, like whatever made them was walking upright, at least part of the time. I followed the trail for about a 1/4 mile before it disappeared into a rhododendron thicket so dense I couldn't force my way through. But just before I lost the tracks, I found something that made me wish I'd brought more than just my service revolver. Caught on a thorn bush about 6 feet off the ground was a piece of torn fabric. I recognized it immediately. It was from Romano's fire shirt. But the way it was torn, it looked like something had grabbed him and lifted him clean off his feet. That night back in my tower, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Wind in the trees, an owl calling, the metal structure settling in the cooling air. I kept thinking about those tracks, about equipment destroyed by impossible strength, about 8 experienced firefighters vanishing without a trace. Around dry AM I heard howling. At first, I thought it was coyotes. We've got plenty of them in the mountains, and they make all kinds of noise at night. But this was different. Deeper, more powerful, and it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Like a pack was surrounding my tower. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Mixed in with the howling was a human voice. Faint, distorted, but definitely human. It was calling my name. Doug Patterson, help us. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the forest below, but it was too dark to see anything. The voice came again, clearer this time. Doug, we're trapped. Please help us. It sounded like Mike Romano. I reached for my radio to call for backup, but stopped with my hand on the microphone. If Romano and his crew were down there, why hadn't they used their own radios? Why were they calling up to me instead of following standard emergency procedures? The howling started again, but now I could tell it wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, like the animals, whatever they were communicating with each other, coordinating. The voice called my name one more time, but now I could hear something wrong with it. The words were right, but the tone was off. Like someone was trying to imitate Romano's voice, but couldn't quite get it perfect. I turned on every light in the tower and kept my revolver in my hand until sunrise. When morning came, I made 2 decisions. First, I was going to search for any sign of Romano's crew, whether they were alive or dead. Second, I was going to arm myself with more than just a 6-shot revolver. I had a military surplus M1 rifle stored in the tower's equipment room, along with a box of ammunition. I'd kept it for emergency situations, aggressive bears, that sort of thing. Now I had a feeling I was going to need it for something worse than bears. As I loaded the rifle and checked my gear, I tried to convince myself there was a rational explanation for everything I'd seen and heard. Maybe the crew had encountered a pack of rabid animals and been forced to abandon their equipment. Maybe they were holed up somewhere, injured but alive, and the voices I'd heard were real. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something was hunting in these mountains. Something that could destroy steel tools with its bare hands. Something that could coordinate like a military unit. Something smart enough to use human voices to lure victims. And now it knew where to find me. I spent the next 2 days searching every trail, every creek bed, every clearing within 5 miles of the tower. What I found convinced me that Romano's crew wasn't the first to disappear in these woods. In a cave system about 3 miles north, I discovered remnants of camping gear that looked like it had been there for years. Tattered fabric, rusted metal, bones that had been gnawed and scattered. Some of the bones were definitely human. I recognized a skull fragment and what looked like a femur. But they were old, weathered, like they'd been there for decades. Scratched into the cave wall were names and dates going back to the 1942. Fire crews, hunting parties, survey teams. All missing, all presumed dead from natural causes or equipment failures. But now I was seeing a pattern that nobody had recognized before. They'd all disappeared during drought years, when fire danger was highest and crews were working alone in the most remote areas. On my second night of searching, I made camp in a natural clearing about 4 miles from my tower. I figured, if something was hunting me, I'd rather face it in the open than be trapped in the tower. I built a fire and settled in to wait. Around midnight, they came. I saw them first as shapes moving between the trees at the edge of my firelight, big shapes, too big to be any normal animal. They circled my camp for what felt like hours, always staying just outside the light, but I could see their eyes reflecting like yellow coins in the darkness. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. They moved with a coordination that made my skin crawl. When one shifted position, the others adjusted to maintain their circle, like soldiers executing a tactical maneuver. Then one of them stepped into the light. It stood about 8 feet tall, on 2 legs, covered in dark gray fur that looked almost black in the firelight. Its head was wolf-like but larger, with intelligence in those yellow eyes that no animal should have. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in hands that were part human, part claw. When it opened its mouth, I saw teeth that could tear through bone. But the thing that really terrified me was how human it looked when it moved. It wasn't some mindless beast. It studied me with the same cold calculation I'd seen in enemy soldiers during the war. It spoke to me, not in words, but in Romano's voice. "Doug, why didn't you help us? We called for you." I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, it melted back into the darkness. The circle around my camp tightened, and I could hear them moving through the underbrush, testing my defenses, looking for weaknesses. I fed my fire all night, keeping it blazing bright. Every time the flames started to die down, the circle would tighten, and I'd hear that awful mimicry of human voices calling to me from the darkness. Romano, and others too. Voices I didn't recognize, probably other victims from years past. At dawn, they withdrew. But I found their tracks all around my camp, and carved into a nearby tree was a message that made my blood run cold. "Come home to the tower, Doug. We'll be waiting." The message was carved with claws, but the letters were perfect. Whatever these things were, they could write. I packed up my gear and headed back to Fire Tower 7, but I knew I was walking into a trap. They'd had all night to plan, all night to position themselves, and they knew exactly where I was going. The hike back should have taken 3 hours. It took me 6, because I had to stop every few hundred yards to listen, to watch, to make sure I wasn't being herded like prey into a killing zone. But no matter how carefully I moved, I could sense them out there, pacing me, staying hidden, but always present. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, or hear the snap of a twig that was just a little too loud to be the wind. When I finally reached the tower, I understood why they'd let me make it back. They'd been busy. Every piece of equipment in the base of the tower had been destroyed. My radio, my emergency supplies, my vehicle, all of it twisted and broken, like they'd used superhuman strength to take out their rage on anything human-made. The ladder leading up to the observation deck had been torn apart, leaving me no way to reach the top of the tower where my main radio was located. I was trapped on the ground with no way to call for help and no way to escape. That's when I realized this wasn't just hunting. It was warfare. They'd cut off my communications, destroyed my transportation, eliminated my defensive positions, and isolated me from any possibility of rescue. These weren't just intelligent predators. They were thinking like military tacticians. As the sun set on my third day in hell, I heard them gathering in the forest around the tower. More of them than I'd seen before. Their howls echoed from every direction, a sound that seemed to shake the metal structure I was trapped inside. But now I could hear something else in their voices: excitement, anticipation. They'd been playing with me, testing me, learning my capabilities. Now they were ready to finish the hunt. I checked my rifle one more time, counted my ammunition, and prepared for the longest night of my life. Outside, the pack began to close in. They came at me just after full dark, and what I saw in those first few minutes changed everything I thought I knew about the enemy I was facing. There were 12 of them, moving in perfect coordination like a special operations unit. They'd studied the tower's construction during the day and knew exactly how to attack it. While 4 of them climbed the support legs with impossible agility, the others began systematically destroying the foundation. But it was their intelligence that truly terrified me. They used tools, pieces of my destroyed equipment turned into weapons and levers. They communicated with complex vocalizations that were clearly language, not just animal sounds. And they demonstrated tactical patience that exceeded anything I'd seen from human soldiers. The largest one, obviously their leader, positioned itself where I could see it clearly and began to speak. Not mimicking this time, but using its own voice. Deep and rumbling, but perfectly understandable. "Douglas Patterson, Marine, Fire Watcher, we know what you are." I aimed my rifle at its center mass. "What do you want?" "What we have always wanted. These mountains. Our territory. You humans come here with your machines, your fires, your roads. You think you own what has been ours for centuries." "The fire crews," I said, "Romano's men, what did you do to them?" The creature's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing those terrible teeth. "They became part of us. As you will." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about territory or hunting. They were building their pack, converting humans into something like themselves. The voices I'd heard calling my name hadn't been mimicry. They'd been the transformed remains of previous victims. "How many?" I asked. "Every fire crew that has worked alone in our territory for 20 years. Every hunter who came too deep into our woods. Every surveyor, every scientist, every fool who thought these mountains belonged to him." The others had finished their examination of the tower's weak points. I could feel the structure starting to sway as they attacked the foundation supports. In a few more minutes, they'd bring the whole thing down with me in it. I had to make a choice. Stay and die when the tower collapsed, or come down and face them in the open with at least a fighting chance. I chose to fight. Using an emergency rope, I rappelled down the backside of the tower while they were focused on the front supports. I hit the ground running and made it about 50 yards before they realized what I'd done. The chase through the wilderness became a running battle that tested every combat skill I'd learned in Korea. They had supernatural speed and senses, but I had military training and intimate knowledge of local terrain from 5 years of fire suppression work. I led them through the roughest country I could find, rocky outcrops where their size worked against them, thick brush that slowed them down, creek beds where their scent tracking became confused. I used every guerrilla warfare tactic I knew, setting up ambushes, hitting them hard, then disappearing before they could coordinate a counterattack. My rifle ammunition was limited, so every shot had to count. I discovered that headshots could drop them permanently, but body shots only slowed them down. Whatever they were, they had incredible resilience and seemed able to heal from wounds that would kill a normal animal. But the most terrifying thing was how quickly they adapted to my tactics. When I used concealment, they learned to track me by sound. When I tried misdirection, they started leaving sentries to watch for flanking movements. They were learning from every encounter, becoming more effective with each engagement. The running battle lasted for hours, covering miles of wilderness. I managed to kill 3 of them and wound several others, but they were wearing me down through sheer attrition. I was exhausted, almost out of ammunition, and running out of tricks. That's when I remembered something from my fire suppression training that might give me one final chance. There was an old fire break about 2 miles from the tower, a deliberately cleared strip of land designed to stop the spread of major fires. More importantly, there was an emergency supply cache hidden there with firefighting equipment, including flares and emergency fuel supplies. If I could reach it, I might be able to use fire as a weapon. I'd noticed during our encounters that they showed extreme caution around flame, backing away whenever I'd managed to light a torch or get near my campfire. The problem was getting there. It meant crossing open ground where their speed advantage would be overwhelming. I waited until they'd spread out searching for me, then made a desperate sprint across a meadow toward the fire break. They spotted me halfway across and converged from 3 directions, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to move. I reached the supply cache with seconds to spare, diving behind the metal storage box as claws raked across my back. Inside were road flares, a flare gun, and 5 gallons of emergency fuel. Everything I needed to turn the tables. The pack leader approached cautiously, clearly recognizing that I'd found some kind of tactical advantage. When it spoke, there was uncertainty in its voice for the first time. "You cannot escape, Patterson. Surrender now, and your transformation will be swift." Instead of answering, I pulled the pin on a road flare and held it up. The reaction was immediate. All 12 creatures backed away, their confident coordination suddenly broken. "That's right," I said. "You're afraid of fire. How afraid?" I opened the fuel container and began splashing gasoline in a wide circle around my position. The pack retreated further, but I could see them regrouping, preparing for a coordinated rush that would overwhelm me before I could create an effective fire barrier. The final confrontation came down to timing and nerve. When they charged, I had maybe 3 seconds to turn my position into an inferno before they reached me. I threw the flare into the gasoline and dove flat as flames exploded in a circle around the supply cache. The screams of the pack leader as it caught fire were unlike anything I'd ever heard. Part animal, part human, part something else entirely. The others retreated, but their coordination was broken. Without their leader, they reverted to individual animals driven by pain and fear rather than tactical intelligence. I used the flare gun to drive them back, then followed up with more fuel and more fire. By dawn, the pack was scattered and broken, with their leader dead and several others badly burned. The survivors retreated deep into the wilderness, but I could tell from their behavior that they'd learned a hard lesson about the effectiveness of fire as a weapon against them. It took rescue teams 2 days to find me. When they did, I was sitting beside the burned-out remains of the supply cache, surrounded by evidence of a battle that nobody was quite ready to believe. The official report listed the incident as wildlife encounter with defensive use of emergency fire suppression equipment. Romano's crew was declared missing and presumed dead due to equipment failure during end quote. The destroyed gear. The destroyed gear was attributed to severe weather damage and scavenger activity. But I wasn't the only one who knew the truth. 3 days after my rescue, while I was still in the hospital being treated for cuts, burns, and exhaustion, I got a visit from 2 men who identified themselves as military intelligence officers. They asked very specific questions about pack coordination, tactical intelligence, and supernatural capabilities. Turns out the military has been quietly investigating reports of encounters with non-standard hostile entities for decades. My detailed combat report became part of a classified file that included similar incidents from wilderness areas across the country. They offered me a choice. I could return to fire suppression work with an official commendation and the understanding that I'd never speak about what really happened on Cranberry Mountain. Or I could transfer to a special military unit that dealt with supernatural threats on a permanent basis. I chose the transfer. For the past 4 years, I've been part of a classified team that trains military personnel for encounters with entities that don't officially exist. My experience on Cranberry Mountain became the foundation for tactical doctrine on supernatural pack hunting behavior. The pack itself is still out there. Satellite surveillance and remote monitoring equipment confirm ongoing activity in the deepest parts of the wilderness. But they've learned caution. No more direct attacks on fire suppression crews, no more bold territorial displays. They've adapted, become more careful, more selective in their hunting, which makes them more dangerous, not less. We've identified similar pack territories in 12 other wilderness areas across the country. Montana, Alaska, northern Minnesota, the Olympic Peninsula, always in remote areas where people work alone, always with a history of unexplained disappearances during high-activity seasons. The military presence in these areas has increased quietly. Special operations teams train in environmental hazard management. Emergency supply caches now include flame weapons and enhanced communications equipment. Rangers and fire crews receive tactical training they're told is for aggressive wildlife encounters. But here's what keeps me awake at night. We're not dealing with a stable situation. Each encounter teaches them more about our capabilities and limitations. They're evolving, learning, becoming more sophisticated in their methods. And they're not the only supernatural threat out there. My team has investigated incidents involving entities that make the Cranberry Mountain Pack look like house pets, things in the deep caves of Kentucky that hunt by sound alone, creatures in the Alaskan wilderness that can mimic any human voice perfectly, entities in the Nevada desert that seem to exist partially outside normal physical reality. The world is full of places where humans don't belong, where things exist that challenge everything we think we know about the natural order. Most people live their entire lives without encountering these entities, but for those of us who work in the deep wilderness, who spend time alone in places where civilization has never fully taken hold, the threat is always present. I'm 53 years old now, too old for field operations, but still involved in training and tactical development. Every year, we get better at preparing people for encounters with supernatural threats. Every year, the entities get smarter about avoiding detection and confrontation. It's an arms race between human military capability and supernatural intelligence, and I'm not sure we're winning, but we're fighting. And sometimes, in the deep wilderness where normal people fear to go, that has to be enough. The Cranberry Mountain Pack is still out there, still hunting, still growing, but now they know that humans can fight back, that we're not helpless prey to be taken whenever they choose. They know that fire can kill them. And they know that there are people like me, people trained in the old military ways, people who've learned how to turn supernatural advantages against the creatures that possess them. It's not much of a comfort, but it's something. The wilderness belongs to many things, and humans are just one of them, but we're the only ones with fire, and the only ones smart enough to use it as a weapon. Sometimes, that's enough to tip the balance. Sometimes,